You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week we're joined by Rachel Dorsey, an autistic speech-language pathologist. Rachel has an extensive background in supporting children with a variety of neurodivergences and medical conditions through speech, language, and social connections, self-advocacy, emotional and sensory regulation, as well as feeding challenges. Rachel's also working on developing a continued education course focused on affirming goals. Welcome to the podcast, Rachel Dorsey.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, one of the things I love to be able to do, Rachel, is, this podcast and our subject today is really about your experience. But what I'd love to understand a little bit more is what inspired you to go the route of becoming a speech pathologist, and how those personal experiences that you might have gone through or have been a part of your life have influenced your practice so far.
Yeah. So I'll start with the first question, how I got into speech pathology. And when I was in college, I was originally, I did end up majoring in linguistics, but I wanted to apply it somehow. I wanted something a little bit more applied, and I volunteered a lot in the university's speech therapy clinic, and through that I saw many different types of clients, but a lot of autistic kids in particular. And it's funny, I didn't know that I was autistic at the time. I could sense that the thing that these kids really wanted was something that, my whole life I've been craving, and is often just can feel a little bit out of reach. And so I really, it resonated with me, and so I decided to add on speech pathology in undergrad, and the rest is history.
Well, that must have, just even thinking through your own experience and being able to make that connection, there must have been that level of just empathy or even just understanding as you're approaching any of your clients, just knowing that every one of them is so unique in the way that they're processing both the input and output of language, and how creative you must have to be as a clinician. Can you just give us a little bit of background about, when people think of speech language pathologists, is that automatically you're thinking, okay, well, they're working on articulation. They're looking at just speech tools. But how much language processing and the ability to understand how somebody actually communicates, how critical is that?
Oh, wow. I would say that I honestly, I don't think in all ways I have an edge. I think that with the language processing in particular, I have a little bit of an edge here, because the language processing that I commonly see in my autistic clients feels very natural and intuitive to me. So when, years ago, before, a lot of people are talking about Gestalt language processing, which I'd be happy to define, but before it even had a definition, I would hear my autistic clients saying a script, something that they had overheard, and saying it really powerfully. And I'm like, okay, I get what you mean by this. And the only thing that really shifted between like how I did language therapy with non-autistic kids and autistic kids is that I shifted my own definition of what a meaningful unit of language can look like. Everything else stayed the same.
What is Gestalt language processing then? Because starting with that definition is going to be super important, just because a lot of times in all of our fields, these terms seem to be barriers. And the more we can break them down, the better.
Yeah, of course. So Gestalt language processing is a way of processing language where, as opposed to kind of sound by sound being processed to sounds that make up the words, you process language through hearing intonation. First and foremost, picking up on that intonation. And the thing about intonation is that you can have highly intonational word. You could have a highly intonational sentence, a highly intonational song. And so when we hear autistic kids scripting something, it is they're scripting that they're saying that highly intonational thing that they had heard, and whatever there's a meaning to it. Sometimes it is a literal meaning. Sometimes we kind of have to do some digging to figure out what our kids are really getting at. But I think with Gestalt language processing is a language processing style that is pretty common. I would say that autistic kids often are Gestalt language processors and have a language delay. So there are a lot of people walking around who never had a language delay in our Gestalt language processors, and we don't really, we don't really know about them.
When you're talking about some of these scripts, is that oftentimes and I'll go back to kind of how I experienced practice 10, 15 years ago, it's almost like you tried to limit some of the scripts, and that wasn't necessarily good practice at that point, but that's what was happening, is that you're telling the child, you can't be scripting this, as I don't want you just repeating things that others are saying. But the way that you're describing it, there's so much value in the script because they're using it to communicate maybe even something that means a lot to them, that we as the recipient of the communication need to decipher, need to really start to break down and understand, what does the script mean to them? How do I communicate back on this? Is that where kind of some of that affirmation piece that you're really focused on right now, do those two things align with, that person communicates that way? We as the recipients of communication and engaging back and forth, we have to respect that and start to understand what that communication means versus saying, no, you can't communicate to me in the way you feel like is the best way for you.
Yeah, well, first of all, you were summary recasting how I described Gestalt language processing and scripting was really beautiful. I loved that. You put it in just like a really like affirming way.
So Gestalt language processing is just one piece, but your focus is really on neuroaffirming care, and it seems like a broader topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I thoroughly believe that for all kids, for all people, this is really true, but I am especially mindful of it with autistic clients, that authentic learning can only really happen in the context of having a felt sense of safety and security. And so something like hearing a script and then shutting it down, ignoring it is directly opposed to like fostering that learning environment, because you're shutting down the kid's not going to want to say stuff if you're shutting it down. Yeah.
And that's so important. I mean, just even when I went through, I was looking at some of the background of how you approach care, is that the affirming principles that you put into place, whether it's being able to recognize where somebody is as far as their body experience at that time, are they experience some sensory components that they need to be able to kind of work through, or that are self-soothing to them, that might not be something that me or an outsider would be like, oh, I do that, or I don't do that, so you're wrong, you need to stop flapping your hands because I don't personally do that. It's almost judgmental in the way that we're looking at that. And there's got to be a lot of those core components of being able to get your body, your mind in the right position for communication to even start. It's those two things have to go hand in hand. How do you experience that? And how do you encourage families and other practitioners to really, I guess, collaborate and utilize both those components of, understanding where we're at with our sensory, at the same time as being able to create functional language or create communication systems that enable us to be a part of the community?
Yeah, so that's a really multifaceted question. I'll try my best to respond in a succinct way. When I am working with, so I see autistic clients of all ages, so pediatrics through adulthood, and the first thing I ask myself is, goodness, I think that a lot of autistic clients show signs of dysregulation fairly frequently. And I do think that so the signs of dysregulation, like hypervigilance, like being shut down, like I see kids that have like a really low affect most of the time, and then like suddenly like meltdown seemingly out of nowhere. It's easy to be like, well, that's just autism, but the reality is that that isn't just autism. That's distress. And I think because we see that stuff so frequently, we ourselves sometimes be kind of desensitized to it. Like, he's not, like, the kid can't possibly be distressed all the time because I act like that all the time, when the reality is, yeah, they experiencing a lot of persistent distress. I know I said a lot of stuff which sounds bad. However, this is so important to just accept. This is where a lot of autistic people are. Once we accept, okay, this is a child, or this is a adult, whatever, who is showing that they're distressed, then as a team together, we can figure out what needs to change, what has to change, or sometimes, unfortunately, we like big changes can't be made immediately, but so, and then it's a lot of like crisis management. But I think it's important for parents, clinicians, team members to be honest when looking at the situation and trying to arrive at the best course of action.
I love the way that you put that, because immediately it gets my mind thinking to compassion, and it gets to perspectives as well. Is that it's so much easier for me to be able to take the perspective of my child who maybe had similar experiences or sees the world the same way that I kind of have or really understand. So immediately I can respond to that. Immediately as that I can be like, oh, okay, well, that's what's going on. But in order to be a part of everybody's world, is that you have to take that step back and be able to put yourself in their shoes. And that's where the compassion piece comes in. It's if somebody is in that distress that you're talking about, and I'm not recognizing that, so easy for me to exacerbate a situation. So what are some of the techniques that maybe you use? Like, how do you help to be able to A, identify, but B, give the person the safe space for them to start feeling comfortable in that environment?
Yeah, there's varying degrees of, you can be in a crisis mode all of the time, just stuck there, or you can have some anxiety that comes and goes. And I try to get some sort of a feel of in a variety of contexts where people are at. I'm not a mental health provider, but I go in first with a lens of mental health, because I've seen that just makes or breaks it. So when let's say that I can tell, wow, this kid is really struggling. I'm in private practice, so I see kids after school. And so I'm very aware that I don't want to be work after their work. I don't want them to come home and see me and just try to get away from me or roll their eyes or anything like that. So prioritize conducting the session in a way that is, with some kids, it can be quite fun. We can do relaxing things that they find relaxing, like drawing, like looking through comic books, like video games. With some kids, I would say particularly kids that their schooling is a extremely regimented, dictated, like they're not getting kind of affirming education and therapy in school. Those kids come home, and my presence there, my role in those circumstances is, if my presence there is upsetting, I'm like, this isn't a good fit right now, and I talk to parents about how I do have mental health concerns, and I try my best to refer to psychiatric providers, mental health counselors.
Yeah, I mean, so
To me,
you've mentioned the value of the parental role in almost all of these components. This probably especially in being able to create that environment where their child can be successful. What is it that, how do parents actively utilize those same skills that you can as a clinician to be able to help support their child so that they are in a position where they can communicate, where they are regulated and feeling confident in their home environment, which is so important to them.
The kids that I've seen that are, I would say, like really thriving, are kids where their parents pretty flexible themselves with what they with the they accept kind of all communication as valid. They are mindful of some, you know, of their child's sensory needs, and try to the extent that's possible to be proactive about that during outings or in school. I've seen a lot of really happy, I would say, younger autistic kids. Kids, I mean, I would say like under 10, and the reason I would just say under 10 is that because neurodiversity affirming care as a kind of a buzzwordy concept has only really popped off in the past several years. So parents that really, you know, try to embrace these concepts and kind of go with the flow, and their kids are happier a lot, at least in my clinical experience. They seem to be
Yeah.
doing.
Absolutely. I mean, you've hit on so many of those key concepts, and I could imagine that the children and families that you're working with feel like they're in that safe space because you've talked a lot about that compassion, the flexibility, the acceptance, understanding where somebody's at on their journey, and then also one of the things that I'd love just to kind of get your input on is the assessment. Is that as a speech language pathologist, is that you mentioned is that different people communicate different ways, and how important is it for us to really, as clinicians, as family members, as educators, to assess how that person communicates instead of dictating this is what you must do to communicate?
I'm a big fan of seeing, yeah, of assessing what current communication modalities are being used, and how can I, and then trying to figure out how do I foster the development of all of those, or perhaps if one modality is more effective for conveying intensity, can we have the like another modality communicate kind of the concrete thing? So for example, with AAC, so speech generating devices, I'm a big fan of using it to really hit that point home. I find modeling every single word to feel highly unnatural. So the way that I model it is I might say something and pick one or two words or a phrase on the device and then use a lot of body language, and all of this together. I'm modeling like how to communicate a more complex idea than just pressing cookie on their device.
Mm-hmm.
So I love exploring what kids are so creative. I mean all kids. Autistic kids can be so creative with how to utilize different types of technology and the motor skills that they have, and like facial expression or like poking the parent a certain way, like all of that together can convey I would say like pretty unified ideas. If we think of it that way, I think all too often, and it's also me in the past, like early on in my career, I would, just narrowly focus on how many buttons were pushed on the AAC
Mm-hmm.
device or how many words were spoken, and have like blockers, like shades on, not seeing the rest. Um, so I think a holistic understanding communication is uh, pretty it not only like important for I think it's important for parents and clinicians. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, and part of the thing I love about the podcast in general is that I get to learn all these insights. But as you are going through that whole process, I'm thinking about that child who maybe when they're feeling very frustrated or angry, they almost start doing like a sing-song voice, and they utilize their intonation, like you were describing earlier, to be able to express that emotion. Clinicians historically might have said, no, I need you to use your words. I need you to tell me I am angry. Where, that's not going to be as supportive to that child and being able to get their needs out and to be able to kind of really express that emotion, that feeling, the way that maybe needs to be heard. And I think that just having that light bulb moment, I think, is something that we need to talk about more, and that we need to empower clinicians with some of these skills. So what kind of resources are out there that you would recommend to parents, to clinicians, just to, start to have these conversations, to start to expand their own knowledge set on how to be able to work through some of these challenging situations where maybe it's the uniqueness of it is so
Yeah.
hard to kind of
Yeah.
navigate.
Yeah. I love that. Can I really quickly share a like a client story that I thought of when you were talking about frustration?
Please do.
Just what immediately came to mind is I have a client who's a teenager who's made exceptional progress over the past few years, after being kind of stuck in an unwell state, and so it's awesome. But he is now like has enough like a feeling of like agency and power that he is expressing his frustration as opposed to just inwardly, it's now outward. And so what how he can express it is he uses his well, there's a clip from a movie that he likes, um where that a character who's kind of an anti-hero type of a character in this kid's movie is just like he's saying the thing, it has like big body expressions. And so my client, when feeling frustrated and wanting to convey, I guess, a sense of uh, frustration and trying to gain power, he like goes through the literal motions of this character in the film with his body, and says the exact script. And it I this is where I think like speech pathology and kind of like emotional processing, like mental health kind of intersect, because I can tell that as he's doing that, he's kind of going through the wave of emotions. Um, and it's just really cool. It's just really cool to see. Um,
Absolutely. But you almost need that community. Like you need to really educate the community around that individual to
yeah,
understand, this isn't a maladaptive behavior. This isn't something that you need to change. This is something that you need to empower right now to allow that voice to exist because it's a safe way of expressing I'm frustrated and we
absolutely.
need to be responsive and empower that individual. So I love that. Are there other resources that you would say like that maybe we should
Yeah.
turn to?
So I do have a goal writing course. It is a goal writing goals for autistic students online course. I released it a few years ago and it was really well received. And I recently updated it, and there's a big old gold bank, and we go through a series of case studies that are highly realistic. And because that's really important to me, that I don't want to give advice that is just for like the situations where like you have every single resource available. That's not realistic. I really want recommendations, my guidance to feel very practical and to be in like the real that we are. So in that I go through a variety of concepts that we've talked about before. I emphasize a felt sense of safety and security. And then from there is a system of like, okay, what can we do? What can we not do, or we don't know? What do we know? Is there a lot of stuff that we don't know? Can we do anything? So I have a lot of guiding questions to provide scaffolding for the audience. The course is aimed at occupational therapists and speech pathologists. I have four co-lecturers, guest lecturers that are either SLPs that are experts in things I'm not an expert in and have their like incredible insight, and some OTs who are speaking on their of knowledge. So I'm very proud. I'm very proud of it, and it's gotten really great feedback. So that's a resource.
Now, Rachel, where can somebody access that? Would that be on your
Yeah,
website? Would that be
thank you. That's available through Learn Play Thrive. LearnPlayThrive.com. There's a goal. So yeah, there's a goal writing course there. That's the platform it's sold on. I could also offer a discount code. I actually have a good friend and colleague, Bobby Adams Brown, who's an SLP, and their website has an amazing list of resources, podcasts, videos, articles, pamphlets. The Her resources are appropriate for. They're really accessible. So those that are unfamiliar with neurodiversity, it would be wonderful for those that want to learn more about some specific things. There's also some specific resources in there regarding AAC or processing or whatever it may be, regulation. So I honestly go to anchoragespeech.com and go to resources because Bobby's amazing. This is like she has such a talent for collecting the best of the best.
well, I will have to thank Bobby if I meet her, but But ultimately, I think one of the things that's so valuable on this is that there's so much out there. There's so much information, but the fact that you have a professional that's been able to kind of go through and evaluate and put it into a database or into a list that really is, like you said, accessible. That is the empowerment piece. That is the ability for somebody then to go and self-educate. So I think that's a wonderful resource. And I recommend to all of our listeners is that they go and take a look at that and start to kind of read through it and get more knowledge on this subject and neurodivergence in general. But Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. I think that you have such a vast knowledge set in being able to kind of take some of these language components, especially Gestalt communication, and really putting it into an affirming lens to be able to help guide treatment. So, well, thank you, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Of course. Thank you for having me. It was lovely speaking to you.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.